This
Yes,
conference will
let's
now be recorded.
yes. Anyone, any questions, guys, before I can get started? Any questions with the yesterday's session out here? Anyone, any questions? Any questions that I can take before we get started? Okay, let's get started then. All right, so we have a virtual network, we have a SQL database, we have a app service which is connecting to the SQL database, and both are inside the virtual network out here. And this is how the request flow is actually moving. So you, as a user, is trying to go into this particular website called Azure Websites.net, and that is diverting your traffic, or that is diverting a request to the app service. App service is communicating with the SQL database. Guys, can you please go on mute? We don't need the videos on. Please go on mute, please. Please go on mute. It's very disturbing out here while we're giving a class. Please turn off. Yes, please go on mute also. Thank you. Yes, let's come back. So yes, so the request is getting diverted into, let's say, the app service, and then from there you have the database out here. And from the database, the connection between the database and the SQL Server is being established by using something known as a connection string, wherein we are giving the username, we are giving the password, and we are giving all these things out and grabbing all the data and delivering it out there to a user who's interested into my website. And as you all saw, the data looks in a structured format. Uh, you will be able to see the courses, you'll be able to see, let's say, the ratings, the course name, and all these things out here as such. And as a backend database administrator, I have an option anytime to go ahead, connect to this particular database, update my data so that I can give new courses and all these things out here as such. And finally, when you are going into this particular link called app tier web app Azure websites.net, you are able to see that particular content coming from that particular database and delivering it over, let's say, the internet. And yesterday we have seen how do you make this particular application a private application by using something called as an access restriction. And then we are seeing things like what do you mean by scale up? How do you add multiple instances in the background? And how does, let's say, your application service really behave out here as such? So yes, guys, any questions still here? Again, I'll paste the link for the website. So yes, any questions still here? Anyone, any questions still here?
Good morning, Abhishek. So,
Good morning. Go ahead,
this
please.
number of instances in the scale out is maximum is 30, right?
Maximum is 30. Again, it depends upon the plan that you're using. In an
Okay.
S1 plan, if you go here, the maximum instances that you get is at 10. So if I do a scale out, and if I look at, or if I, let's say, go to my plan here and
Okay.
look at my plan, it is S1. This is maximum up to 10 instances subject to availability. So
Oh,
if I
yeah.
go to, let's say, a production plan, etc., these are 30. So yes, the maximum that is available out there are about 30, if not wrong. So 20, 30 is 30 is the maximum that is available out there as such.
Okay. So, depending on the plans,
Apps, yes, app service plan. In
service plan.
S1, maximum is 10. So I cannot, let's say, go ahead and do a scale out, or if I go to the scale out here, I cannot do a 30 here. So I cannot put a 30.
Okay.
It'll only come maximum, it'll only allow me to go ahead and do 10.
Okay. So, the price range also will be high over there.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Yes, no problem. Any more questions, guys? Any more questions?
Uh, the the
Hmm?
auto scaling option is available only in scale out plan, right?
Auto scaling is only available for
Scale out.
scale out. Yes, scale out. Yes, correct. Auto scaling, yes, is only available for scale out. It's not available for scale up. The reason being, scale up is directly related to your pricing model. So you'll have to, or Microsoft expects you to go ahead and do a manual scale or manual scale up if you want to, meaning from one, let's say, one plan to the other. So it is scale up and scale down, scale out and scale in. Scale up meaning you're going from one plan to the other, a lower plan to the higher plan. Scale down meaning you're coming from a higher plan to the lower plan. Scale out meaning you're increasing the instances. Scale in meaning you're decreasing your instances up to such.
In scale out, when we increase the number of instances, the price is fixed depending upon
See,
the plan.
again, depending upon the plan, again, if you are consuming more instances, you are slightly charged out here. Reason being, see, this is an estimated cost. This is an estimated cost out here. So they say that, okay, fine, if you are using one instance of an application or one instance of this one, the price is around 2000 something like that, which is an estimation. Now, this is an estimated out here. But when you increase your instances, this basically Microsoft is going to allocate you back and running virtual machines out here. One virtual machine, it's about 3000. Second virtual machine, if you add it, or the second instance, if you add it, this price slightly goes up. So this price is variable. Does it answer your question?
Yeah. Thank
Any more questions, guys? Okay, so I have given the application link once again to you all. Can you all just click on that particular application link? Let me know what you get there. Are you able to see the application at your end?
Uh, 500 error HTTP.
Okay, 500 error. Okay. Anyone else? Can anyone confirm if you're able to see this? Are you all able to get this particular, or are you all able to see this error, or do you all see the application really running out there?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, then same error. Yes. Okay. Error is the same. Okay, great. But why are we getting this error? What do you think has gone wrong? Any guesses? Anyone?
The
Any guesses? Hmm?
inbound
Go please.
traffic.
Inbound traffic. So let's see. Okay, fine. If I want to look at the inbound traffic, where should I go there? I mean, where should I go here? If I want to look. Hmm? Sorry, go ahead, please.
Networking.
Networking, exactly. Networking. And in the networking, I first need to check the for the inbound traffic. And again, if you see, this is off,
Yes.
which means that your traffic is allowed, which means all your requests are allowed. See, if the let's say if you had an inbound restriction, you would have got a 403 error, not a 500. A 403 telling you are forbidden to, let's say, access this content or something like that. Yes, any more thoughts here? Why do we feel that we are getting a
Connection,
500 error
connection
out here?
string.
Connection strings. Okay, what with the connection strings? So what about the connection strings?
We want to give access for that
Access
role.
for what? Sorry. Okay, but
For
why do you need a role? A role assignment is something that you don't need it here. Reason being, it's using the connection string directly and talking to, let's say, the SQL server. So it's already has the password and etc. So if you see this right, it has the connection string here.
I
It
think it is
has all the
expired.
connection string. But did we set an expiration? Like when we generated the connection string for a SQL database?
No.
Yeah, there's no expiration at all. So SQL Server connection strings don't expire at all until and unless you go ahead and, let's say, manually change the password.
Okay.
So they don't expire. Unlike storage, they don't really expire. But yes, good point. Something related to connection strings. So let's see. Anything else? Anyone else? The intention
IP
here is that
address.
hmm, IP address. Okay.
IP
What about the IP address? Okay. What about the IP address? I'm sorry.
in networking we have added IP addresses, right? So every day it
Right.
will
But yeah, but I removed that. Right. I mean, there is no access restriction today. So if you go into the networking, I added that IP address inside the inbound traffic rule. And today I don't have it. So yesterday what I did is that I again made my website public. So I do not have any restriction at all. Again, if I would have a restriction, that's what I was telling is that key is that I would have gone, let's say, or I would have gotten something like a 403 error. Is any more thoughts here, guys, on what all could go wrong here? Again, the idea here is to understand how do we troubleshoot this out? Like, how do we troubleshoot this scenario? How do we understand what's gone wrong and how do we troubleshoot it out here as such? See, one of the basic tools that is available with any browser, any developer that you work with, any browser that you work in, you have something known as a developer tool that is available or a developer console that is available. So if you do a right, if you do a click here on the three dots of your browser and just go into more tools, there's something called as a developer tool, a developer console, under which you have elements, networks, and all that stuff. So I am under the network tab of the developer console out here. If you reload this particular page, what a developer console does is that it will track all your calls. It will try to see where your call is going, how your call is going, what is the response of your call. Is your call successful? Is there call failure? Whatever it is. So I'll say, just refresh this out. Again, I got the same failure. And in here, it is telling me that this particular website called something.azurewebsites.net is a failed status. It took around 897 milliseconds to load this. And if I look at this again, same thing. It's telling 500 internal server error. This is the request URL, and this is the remote address to which you are requesting, let's say for the content, just 20.191.144.3, nothing but the IP address of the app service, which is 20.191.144.3, colon 443 over a port called HTTPS. And it's telling this is the response, like it's telling it's failing to load the response and etc. And the method is a get method. What do you mean by method here? Is that very simple? You're going inside this particular, let's say, app service, and the app service is trying to get some data. That's what it is trying to tell, is that what it's trying to get a data and all these things out. This is the initial troubleshooting that I would start with, telling what is, let's say, or what is the error that I'm getting here on the browser. And depending upon that, I can say that, okay, fine, this is a 500 internal error. But I don't really know much details about it. I don't really understand why this error is coming in the first place, or what is causing this error to come. I don't really know all these things out here as such. For which you cannot just rely upon the browser that you see. You need something like a monitoring tool, which is very, very, very important whenever you work with, let's say, any organization. Monitoring skills become very, a primary skill out there as such. So I want to gain much more understanding about the error that I'm facing, for which I will now introduce a monitoring tool in my entire architecture called as an application insight. Application insights. Application Insights is a monitoring tool that is offered by, or it's a monitoring solution that is offered by Microsoft in order to, let's say, track all the calls that are going to your app service and also the services that are related to your app service. For example, SQL. App Insights or Application Insights can also track all the errors, all the logs that are going inside your SQL Server or going inside, let's say, a virtual machine, and so on and so forth. Now, as a DevOps engineer, what I do is that we go ahead, create something called as an application insights. How do we create it? When you go ahead and create an app service, right? When you hit the create button of the app service, there's something called monitoring. You can switch this on or switch this off depending upon the plan. It'll say, do you want monitoring? And until today, we just said no, and we went ahead and created the app service, and then we were starting to work directly with the app service out here as such. But today, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go again. I'm going to go and create a resource called application insights. As of now, I don't have an application insights out here. So I'll say create an application insights. I'll use the same application RG. I'll say that this is demo app insights 1000 or something like this. Some name which is unique in nature. Same region as my web app is, I'll put this resource in a classic model. I'll tell what is a classic in a workspace model, and I'll just put it in a classic model out here. Tags, review, and create. That's it. Nothing more than this. I just went ahead, said what is the name of the application insights. I just said what is the region. I just said it's a classic model, and I'm creating this out. So this will end up creating something known as an application insights out here. This is your duty as a DevOps engineer to help the developer create the application insights. Now, this is what has to happen. Whenever the website loads or whenever the app service loads, when it reaches to, let's say, this particular, one thing it does is that it reaches out to the database and tries to call the data, and whatever is the status, meaning whether this particular connection is successful or whether this particular connection is a failure or any kind of a log, should be reported back into the application insights out here. Meaning it should take all those logs and it should try to store it inside the application insights, so that as an administrator or as a DevOps engineer, I can come here into the application insights, understand what is the issue and so on and so forth. In order to do that, you have to have the application insights present, which we created. So we just created that. B is that even your code that is running on your app service, the code that you deployed right earlier using the VS Code, using the Visual Studio, we deployed some code into this one. Even the code should be willing to, let's say, go ahead and let's say send the logs out here. The code should explicitly send the logs into the application insights instance. So both should happen. One, you need the application insights. Two, the code that is running on your app service should be willing to send these logs. And when I say it is willing to send these logs, let's come back again, see the resources created. So it looks something like this. But again, there is no connection whatsoever established between your app service and the application insights. The application insights doesn't know which app service to track to, because the code is not configured to send the logs inside your application insights out here. So if you click on things like, in application map and all these things out, it just says no data available. And, when you look at things like, let's say live metrics, which will be coming on again, back again, it kind of gives me the message that not available, couldn't connect to your application and so on, which means that though I have created the application insights, I haven't configured my code so that it will report back to the application insights out here. In order to do that, again, I'll just go ahead, open the application that I had earlier. So we downloaded this out and we opened this out in, let's say, the Visual Studio, and we did a build and we did a deploy. We did a build and we did a publish, right? Now what I'll do is I'll just open this out, and as a developer, what I'll do is I'll now configure my code so that it reports to that particular application insights out here. Now this is, from now, what you're seeing is what a developer really does out here. But for our demos, we just need to understand how is it done, which will help us to understand how the reporting is happening and so on. So I'll come here into my SQL app. I'll do a right click, and instead of doing a build today, I will say add, and I'll say application insights telemetry. I'll click on this one. So it's now telling, okay, fine, what kind of an application insights that you want to, let's say, install. I have an Azure application insights, meaning I have application insights that is configured on Azure. I'll say, okay, fine, this is the one that I need. I'll say next. And it's now telling me, okay, fine, let me re-enter my credentials out here. Sometimes I need to do this. I'll try to log inside the Azure portal out here as such. So I'll say Azure application insights next. Okay, let's try this out once again. I'll say add. I'll say application insights telemetry. I'll say Azure application insights next. And let's see. Okay, I'll have to enter this out once again. Looks like. Yes, and let me go ahead. get the OTP from my email so that I can go ahead and let's say log inside this one. And once the verification is done, once you have logged inside, let's say your Azure portal, yes. Now if I refresh, it's able to now show me what is the app insights that we have just created or the application insights that we just created. I'll just select this, I'll say next, and I'll say finish. I have now configured my code in such a way, or I'm now trying to configure my code in such a way that it goes ahead. If you see this, right, when you configure it, it's adding multiple snippets of your code to let's say different files out here, telling how it should or what it should report to. And once this is done, I'll just go ahead and publish my code once again. I'll say publish, and here it's telling these are the service dependencies, which is application insights. Now your code is dependent upon a service called application insights right now. And let me republish the code once again. I'll say publish onto the same app tier web app USEs to the same thing. I'm let's say republishing, or I'm let's say redeploying my code. But this time around, I have added one more additional thing, or I've configured one more additional thing called as an application insights out there. Yes, any questions till here that I can take? Any questions that I can take till here? Anyone who's confused on what we are doing? Any questions I can take till here?
Hi,
Anyone? Any
good morning.
questions? Go ahead, please.
You didn't build here, so directly you publish the code here, so you'll understand the language.
Yes, so good question. You directly publish the code, you do not build. Good observation. Again, see, when you try to do a publish, right? Okay, let me come back here. When you try to do a publish, the first thing it'll do is that it'll internally build it out. So the reason that I first try to do a build and then do a publish is earlier to explain things that how the build happens and etc. But when you hit the publish command, the code will internally build and then it'll start the publishing. So for example, so if you see the first step, right, it is building it out, and then in the second step it is publishing. So I do not tell to kind of build this out. I just told it to publish, but the build happens internally when you do a publish out there. Does it answer your question?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Any more questions here, guys, on what did we do here? So we went ahead, we configured the code so that it has the application insights, and we redeployed it out. Any questions, any confusions here?
So here we don't need to build again, right? So
The reason I'm building it again is because that I have now added multiple snippets to my code, or I have added, let's say, I've done some modification to my code. So whenever you do a modification to the code, right, the expectation here is for you is to build it again. To build it again so that all the new, let's say, code that you have added can also be converted into a binary language.
and you have selected the classic. What is the meaning of classic, sir? Because we have it two options over there, right?
Mhm. Correct. So classic and workspace model,
Yeah.
it's just where your logs are stored. Like, we'll talk about that in the coming classes when we do something called as log analytics workspace. Classic model is, let's say, the older model right now. Right now, the new model is the workspace model again. No change in the way you configure your application insights, and no change in the way you, let's say, uh, talk to your application insights or use your application insights. Is just where your logs are stored. So the workspace model is a better way to store your logs out here as such.
Okay, sir.
Yes. Okay. So I published the code, and after publishing it, I still get the same error. This is expected. A reason being I have some issues with my application, and that's the reason I wanted to understand what is the issue with my application. And in order to understand this, I went ahead and I configured something known as an application insights out here. So now if you look at my application insights, now let's go into the application insights out there. Very firstly, let's see. If I go into the app service, since I redeployed the code, let's look at this one. Let's go into the configurations. And since I redeployed this out, I have an additional, let's say, property out here, which tells you what is the application insights I have to report back to right now. And also, let me come down into my application insights. And in order to investigate what are the failures, again, my web app is using this particular key in order to connect to that application insight instance. This is called as an instrumentation key, or an I key, or an instrumentation key. This is the key that, let's say, my code uses in order to tell the application insights that, you know what, I have the key. Can you please let me, or would you please let me go ahead and store the logs? This is now when you configured the application insights, right? It would have added all these keys inside the settings file of your application. So it's telling application insights, the connection string, and it's giving all this entire string out here, telling, okay, fine, where should you report it back to, how should you report it back to, and so on and so forth. So once that's done, let me go inside the application insights, and I want to investigate my failures. So the very first thing I'll do is I'll click on the application map right now, and let's see what it loads out here. Again, for this picture to load here, right, or for this image to load here, it will take about 5 or 6 minutes after you configure the application insights out here. So once you configure the application insights, just give it like about 5 or 6 minutes, and this starts loading. Just go to your application tier. Let's refresh the screen a couple of times, send some artificial requests. So I'm just refreshing the screen, and every time that I refresh my screen, I'm sending a request to my application. And every time I'm sending a request to my application, it first reports back to the application insights out here, telling what is the error. I mean, it'll go into the database, see what is the error it's getting, or what is the logs it's getting, and report back to the application insights out here. Which means that if I go ahead, refresh this out a couple of times, it's telling 4 calls being made, meaning you did a 4 requests out here. Again, there is a slight lag between, let's say, what you request for and how is it getting tracked out there. So it will take some time for these 4 calls to increase. 4 calls is nothing but I did 4 refreshes is what it's telling me, or I tried to request for the same application 4 different times. It's what it's telling me out here. So let's wait for a couple of minutes, and let's see what really happens out here. So let's give it a couple of minutes out here, and it's now loading this page out and etc. So now it's telling me that there are about 59 calls that I made entirely to this particular application, and almost about 75% of the calls are a failure. 75% times is something that I have a failure out here, and the response speed and all these things. This is what it's telling me, and this is telling me that, you know what, this is the name of your app service, which is app tier, and it is requesting for a SQL, or it is requesting for, let's say, a data from a SQL server whose database is called testdb. That's what we have created. And if I click here, it will now show that, you know, what is the error really. So if it's saying get course index and etc., it's telling there are 14 counts of this particular error. I'll say investigate failure. It's telling me, you know what, it's a 500 error. That's the same thing that I'm able to see here also, right? But right now, if I click on this, it's going to tell me where exactly that I'm getting this error here. It's telling, you know what, at 10 something local time, you have a 500 error. So it's trying to go into that particular course table that you have created and trying to get the data, and it is failing to get the data to do so. And it is also telling you what is the error code here, or what is the error exception here. This is all the error that, let's say, your code is now generating and sending it out into the application insights out here. This is one way to check it. The other way, better way, is to go into something known as a live metrics. It tries to go ahead and it try to give you a real-time metric out here, meaning as and when your application loads. So let me load the application out here. Let me give some artificial requests. I'm refreshing my screen a couple of times. and every time I'm refreshing my screen, I'm now getting all these logs. I'm now getting all these incoming logs out here. Earlier these weren't there, and if you check this out, I have the incoming requests. So I refresh my browser a couple of times. I have a lot of incoming requests. Incoming requests are almost equal to the failure rate, meaning each and every call that I'm making is a failure. And also the dependency call rate, meaning dependencies are nothing but all the applications that your web app is dependent upon. For example, in my case, I have a SQL database out here, and even this is a failure. Everything it's calling is a failure out here right now. Let's see. It has something called as a sample telemetry. Telemetry is nothing but logs, wherein it is telling you that, you know what, the request is coming to something called course index, meaning you are requesting to go into that particular table called course, and you're trying to, let's say, get that particular, let's say, data inside the course, and the exception, meaning the actual error, is this: login failed for the test user. So it's telling, you know what, the test user that you're using, meaning in that particular credential, in that particular connection string, you had a test user and the password associated with that particular test user. So it's now telling, you know what, there is some issue with your test user out here, and it's also telling me what is failing, meaning what request is failing or what dependency call is failing. And if you check this out, this is what it's telling me. It's telling me there is a SQL server out here and there is a SQL database. And when you're trying to open a connection with this particular SQL database, this is what is failing. In a real time, you just cannot have just one particular SQL database. You can have, let's say, a SQL, you can have a storage account, you can have another service. You now need to identify which service is failing, and that can be identified using all these things. Again, if you go down into failures, or if you go down into something like application map and then look at your actual failure, let's say view detail and say investigate failures, and just click on this one. It's now telling that, okay, fine, the app service, right? If you look at the diagram here, it's telling the app service called app tier web is trying to request for database, or is trying to request for server called demo server ABC, database name testdb, and this is where you're getting the exception, or this is the error. This is where you're hitting the error. It's telling again, login failed for this particular user. Now this error can come in two instances. If this particular user does not exist, test user is someone who does not exist, or the password is incorrect, either one of them. So now what I'll do is that, using these errors, based on these errors out there, I'll go back into my database, and I'll just firstly try to log in inside the database using the password. So the password that I set here was Microsoft-001. So I'll just go ahead and take the same password, Microsoft-001. It will throw an error telling that my client IP is not listed, because this is a server. I do not want to list my client IP. I'll say just allow this out to just test whether I'm able to, let's say, connect to it. I'm able to connect to it with the same password. Now let's go back into the app service. And in the app service, guys, one quick question here. Where did we give the connection string? Where did we exactly give the connection string in the app service out here?
Configurations.
Configurations, exactly. So inside the configurations, and inside the configurations, this is where I've given the SQL connection out here. And what I want to check is whether the password is right or wrong, or whether the username is right or wrong. Test user, and now the password is something different, 001. So now what I did earlier, when before I began this class, I changed the password manually. I wanted to change this out so that I can produce the error. And from there, I wanted to understand how you can trace back the error, or to how, or where you can trace back the error out here. The password was supposed to be Microsoft-001. I put it a different password, a wrong password, and that's the reason it's failing. So if I save this out, It's now telling, okay, fine, the SQL connection is now being corrected, and I'm updating my connection strings. Once that's done, I'll just go ahead and restart my web application. And once I restart this out, I'll come back. I'll try to, let's say, load the page once again, and I'll see what exactly happens at this point. Will I get the same error called 500, or will I get a different error? I'm not getting an error. I am getting the actual request, or I'm getting, let's say, I'm getting back the request out here. If I now load the developer tools, let's say more tools, let's say developer tools out here, and reload this page, and the status, if it loads all good, if it loads all fine, the status you should see is a 200 status. 200 is all good, all okay. So it's taking some time to load out here, but when it loads, you should be able to see a 200 status out here as such. And this is the same thing that will be reported back into your application insights as well. Again, if you see, I'm not really worried about this one. This is a plain text out here, so it's good. But the status is now telling that it's a 200 okay. Telling that okay, fine, the application is responding back good enough. And the same thing again, if I refresh it a couple of times as well, all these things will be reported back into my application insights as such. So if I now go into my application insights, now go into the application map, it's now tracking the successful calls. So 86% of the calls are a failure. Now it's telling, okay, fine, everything is red apart from, let's say, 2 different calls out here, which are being successful. So it's now slowly also tracking all the successful calls. And if I go into my live metrics again, I try to open the live metrics and see what happens this time around. I'll just refresh this a couple of times. And these are the incoming requests. There is no failure at all. So if you see, failure is just a single blank line. There's literally no failure call at all out here as such. Outgoing is good, healthy. And if I scroll down, it'll also tell me what are the backend running instances that I have, and what is the total CPU consumption of these instances out here as such. Again, it's showing me 2 different instances because for the amount of requests, it's just Microsoft is telling, okay, fine, two instances are good enough. We are good there. 2 app services are good, and so on and so forth. So this is how the entire application insights really works out here. Again, application insights is not the only tool, guys. It's not the only monitoring tool. You have multiple tools in the market, like you have something called New Relic, you have something called Prometheus, you have something called Datadog. You have a lot of tools out here, Grafana, you have a lot of tools out here that are available in the market. But when you are working as an Azure DevOps engineer, or when you're working with the Azure cloud, mostly I have observed that application insights is one of the most powerful tools that can be leveraged out here. And in today's session, we were trying to understand how do you configure the application insights, and how do you track the errors, and if you track the error, how do you trace it back to, what's the error out here, how do you, let's say, understand the error. This is something that is, super important out here as such. Yes, any questions till here? Anyone, any questions that I can take till you? Any questions or any confusions that I can address?
Hi.
Okay,
Like you
please.
said, we can use a maximum 30 instances. So it
Mhm.
is sufficient to actually for like websites like IRCTC.
More than sufficient, should be more than sufficient, because one instance can itself, let's say, take thousands of requests out there. So if there are, like, 30 instances that are running in the background, that should be good enough. If it's still not good enough, then you can, create a new app service, and you have something called traffic manager, to divert the traffic and so on and so forth. So yes, there are multiple techniques that websites use in order to divert their traffic. But yes, to be honest, 30 instances is a lot. there are a lot of, let's say, requests it can handle. So that should be sufficient. That should be good enough. Yes, any more questions, guys?
How to add application insight using portal?
How to add application insights using portal? That's what we did, right? We created something called application insights, clicked and said created. This is how we added, or this is how we
No.
created the application insight.
To the web app.
To the web app, you have to come through the code. You cannot add it directly via portal out there.
Okay. While creating the app service, we can add.
Yes, while creating the app service also we can add it. You can just go into the networking tab. I mean, you can just go into the app service when you're creating the app service out here. You can go into the monitoring and just say yes out here. That's it. Once you say yes, it will tell you what is the application insights and etc. And this will help you, let's say, to add the application insights directly when you're creating the app service itself.
So we cannot add to an existing web app, right? After creating.
You can add to an existing web app as well. After creating also you can add it. That's what we did, right? So we created an application insights and then we configured this out. So yes, you can add it to an existing application. You can add it to an existing app service as well.
Okay.
Cool. Any other questions, guys?
So from SQL, did DevOps class started?
Sorry, from SQL, I didn't get you. Can come again, please?
From SQL, did DevOps class started?
From SQL, it was no. I didn't get your question. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, please? On what exactly that you're trying to ask? Okay. Okay. So the expectation here, guys, is that just go through the documentation of something called as an application insights out here. So let's say application insights. Sure, just go there. See what exactly is an application insights. How do you trace your application? What are live metrics? What is availability and etc. Just trace through this and just go through today's demo. Just try to configure and let's say create the application. Just try to configure and deploy the application insights out here. That should be good enough out here as such. Okay, any more questions, guys? Okay, so that's it from mine today. Have a good day ahead. Please follow this out and try to, let's say, configure the application insights out here. And let me know if you have any questions. Thank you and have a great day. Thanks, guys.